All right, we're live. Welcome to Creator Conversations from Sutra.co. And I'm here today with Andy Swindler. I'm super excited to have this conversation. Andy is the co-founder of FeelReal, which is a network of space holders with an intention to scale empathy through guided, intimate gatherings online. And he also recently joined Translator, which is a platform that helps organizations build a culture of inclusion through live facilitated conversations. Andy, I'm just really grateful that you made time to join me here. And I feel like you have such a depth of experience from the nitty gritty of holding space to the more macro details of building community and trying to build a business out of relational experiences online. So I'd love to hear from you just a little bit about, the work that you've been doing over the last 3 years, just to give our audience a little bit of context.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for hosting this. And I'm so excited for your next big step in fundraising and what's going to happen with Sutra. So this for me started in 2007. I saw a vision in a dream, which I know you and I have both done a lot of, deep soul searching and consciousness work. And even lately I've been reading about kind of the importance of dreams in some indigenous cultures where it was, it was regarded as a soul wish. And, you'd show up in council the next morning and be like, well, hey, my dream said I should, go 300 miles and deliver this seashell or whatever. And everybody'd say, okay, well, we'll see you in a few months. There just wasn't a question. It was like, there was such an incredible trust placed on that. So I didn't trust it is the reality. I knew it was big. And I woke up that morning and I sketched out these notes for a kind of platform. And that's one of the reasons I'm so excited about what you're building, because there's a lot of pieces of Sutra in that, there's a lot of pieces in that I see in Sutra, I should say, probably more accurately. But you've obviously come at that from a totally different path. And I think that's what excites me, because I think a lot of us who have been in these spaces, in these relational spaces, whether it's circle practice or just convening more generally, or training, or going deep, or holding space, or coaching, whatever it is, there's just this, I think, huge movement. And I'm so excited for all the impact you all have had to touch so many people. And what I noticed is I was pretty protective about that at first. It was kind of a capital response, like, oh, wait, this is the next Facebook or whatever, and I need to capitalize on it. And it took 12 years actually to kind of shift my own consciousness to get to a point where I realized, no, this has to be collaborative. This is just one little person. I'm just holding one little piece of this puzzle. But it did provide a compass to lead me to what I now frequently call space holders, or people like you who are supporting space holders with really robust technology and community support. And one thing I love about you is you go beyond that. I've taken some of your courses, so just you're so generous of sharing what you've learned. So 3 years ago, then, that finally led me to launching FeelReal. And I'd say the most consistent idea has been to build a community of space holders, and then really learn, like, well, what do they need for support? Both in terms of building, we think of each of them more or less as a small business, or a micro business. I mean, most of them are kind of out there on their own. And I know firsthand, having built my own businesses for 20 years and also being like an independent coaching consultant, it's just like everybody is kind of out there doing it on their own and reinventing everything. Like one of the things we do now in our newsletter is promote the trainings that are relevant to space holders. And these are across the areas of mindfulness and social justice and social emotional intelligence and a number of other categories. And of course, obviously, facilitation and circle keeping and restorative justice. And I could go on and on. But these kinds of qualities that we feel are essential for holding space, being together, cultural awareness, so that we can be real with each other, I guess, is the short version. And for me, that means, we've really got to authentically understand ourselves and where we're coming from. And that means looking at the hard stuff, the biases and the shadows and all of the things that, I think as a society, we're generally trained not to look at, or we're just whether it's actively trained not to look at it or we're just not trained to look at it for the most part. But I know you and I are both connected to so many groups that go deep. So it's been, as any startup, a wandering road over the last 3 years. We started doing a lot of research, particularly in the category of diversity, equity, and inclusion. The main thesis was, how can circles really bring those practices deeper? It's a rather large industry at the time, 8 billion. Last I heard was 15 billion worldwide. But it doesn't tend to be having a huge impact. It tends to be checking a box, maybe doing a training here and there. But one of the things we've learned building FeelReal over the last 3 years is that it's really these ongoing cohorts, these ongoing circles or communities of practice that seem to have the most impact. And through the pandemic, we ended up launching a consumer marketplace, and we've hosted about 300 circles through our community. We're connected now to more than 600 space holders. And that's really exciting. We're really proud of that. A lot of them were focused around social justice issues like racial justice. It was a pay what you feel marketplace, like a sliding scale. And I noticed that happening. That seemed to be happening a lot more during the pandemic, as well as mutual aid, which I'm really involved with. So I think there was just inherently this sense of, wow, we need to make things more accessible. We need to somehow find a way to meet people where they are, and at the same time not give it all away. It often seems like this zero sum where somebody is sort of either charging a lot of money or they're just giving it away for free. But there's this middle ground of how can we build tiers? How can we actually meet people and maybe offer scholarships once we know their situation? And I think that seems to be at the core, I think, of what brings you and I together is this relational piece. Like, let's truly build technology and cultures and communities where we have the space to actually know each other more directly, and where we actually meet each other and we take the time to do that. I mean, there's a lot of nuances in Sutra just that I think kind of, and correct me if I'm wrong, but are kind of actively working against this tendency we have in other networks to just either like something or just drop a comment that's not very thoughtful, and then bug out. And so I just appreciate, that's one of the things I've always appreciated about Sutra is the nuance of how do we actually build technology that that encourages us to really engage with each other, and because I think what's happening, and I mean, it's pretty clear in a lot of other areas and research, that a lot of our other social technology is pretty explicitly designed to divide us. We've been calling them algorithms of outrage, where they're just promoting, they're really just rewarding anything that gets attention. And because of the way our biology works and our negativity bias, we are kind of like moths to a flame with things that are divisive and clickbaity kind of headlines. And I think for the most part, that's even worse. I mean, that's basically what the dream was about in 2007, was trying to design a different kind of way of being together than was common then, and I think has even been systematically designed to encourage disconnection. And then more broadly, that scales out to all kinds of disconnection from ourselves, from each other, from our communities, from the environment, et cetera, et cetera. And then, about a year ago, things were tapering off a bit with that approach, with that marketplace. And we turned our attention back to really the original concept, because it's, as well as I do, how hard it is to launch a consumer marketplace for a variety of reasons. But what remained very strong was the community, was this network of space holders that we had built. And the idea that, they need emotional support because they're doing a lot of emotional labor in the world. They need training. They need all, maybe it's even just business advice and, how to do marketing. I mean, it's a lot of things that I know you all are active as well. So that led us back to looking at how does this apply within business contexts, because people are already organized. They need a lot of help. There's a lot of harm being done in businesses. Every business is still trying to figure out, as far as I know, all the ones I talk to are still trying to figure out DEI and remote work and culture and all the things. And so that led us to build this partnership with Translator in the last 6 months. And that's very, very exciting. And I'm going to pause there because I feel like I just dropped a lot in, and I want you to guide us for where we want to go next, but happy to talk about kind of where we are today.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. And I feel like there's so many directions we could go from what you just shared, from just the nuances of actually creating meaningful connection online, to what it takes to build a community, to build a community of space holders, and specifically again online, to what it takes to really build a business. Whether you're like a micro business, or whether you're trying to build a broader kind of like tech startup kind of thing, like marketplace type of business. So I'd love to start maybe with and I'd love to cover all three in this conversation, just broadly, because I feel like you probably have a lot of insight and wisdom on all three of those. But maybe let's just start about with the nuances of holding space online. And it's funny, when you were talking, I was like, oh, I wonder, you had this dream in 2007. And then I'm wondering, like, when that kind of crystallized into this understanding of space holding. Like, I know for me, I had a big vision in 2011, but it took a few years, like not until probably like 7-8 years later, that I kind of figured out that, the technology by itself doesn't magically create meaningful connection. You need process, and that process is kind of what we're calling space holding. So I'm curious a little bit about kind of when space holding became a thing for you, and anything specific that you've discovered, or your observations of this, what it takes to really create meaningful connection online.
Yeah. So one thing that comes up is that I think technology, maybe we've reached a similar conclusion, that technology just tends to amplify and accelerate human nature. And I think for a long time, I imagined technology could be its own solution. One of the very first pitch decks for FeelReal talked about our relationship, humanity's relationship with technology being in a kind of an infancy or maybe adolescent stage at best. And then since then, I've kind of broadened that to realize that this is about a lot of this is about emotional maturity. Like, can we meet each other? Can we stay in those hard conversations? For me, that's the central point there, is really emotional maturity. So whether we bring that emotional maturity to our technology or not really has a massive impact. So can the technologies help guide that a bit, or keep that on the rails, or sort of provide structures for people to meet? Absolutely. Is it going to make people go through the deeper work to really develop more emotional maturity? Probably not. I mean, it's possible it can. That's one of the things Translator is actually working on, is that intersection basically of space holding and training technology. So it's funny, we were really excited about how can we hold space online pre-pandemic. And I got lucky because I was doing my coach training, my purpose coach training back in 2017, and we were on Zoom. I think I was the first cohort on Zoom. So I was getting familiar with Zoom at that point, and just starting to get a sense of like, wow, this is pretty cool. I mean, obviously some form of video technology had existed, but it tended to be more corporate and expensive and didn't work that well, or whatever. And then through the True Purpose Institute, they had actually launched something called the Gathering for Change Agents 10 years ago. So I am now a co-host in this monthly gathering for change agents. And actually, it'd be cool to have you on that maybe sooner than later. And it was so ahead of its time, and it was using, I don't know if you ever used Maestro Conference back in the day, really cool, like phone conference platform, really advanced. Actually, it has some features Zoom still doesn't. And so I think it was funny that my purpose kind of led me to these communities that were doing this. They had figured out a lot of ways about convening online, whether on phone or later Zoom. And yet it still felt, I don't know if this was your experience, but it still kind of felt like pulling teeth pre-pandemic, to be like, no, this is like amazing. We can get on, and because it just, people weren't used to it. And I'm not here to say that what we're doing right now is replacing in-person interactions. And yet you and I have never met in person.
And that's almost hard to believe, because it feels like we have.
Exactly. It really, truly is. And that's true of a lot of relationships I have. So, that tells me that it's certainly possible. I mean, back in 2007, I thought the biggest problems were being time shifted. Like we're not, meeting in real time, or we're meeting asynchronously, and it being anonymous. But actually, as many problems as there are with Facebook, it actually kind of dispelled the anonymous piece, because you could talk about projected, personas, and not being our real selves and all of that. But at least most of us have our real name. At least, if I go to your Facebook profile, it's going to have your name, and I have some sense of who you are. And so, again, I don't think it was about emotional maturity, or I'm sorry, I don't think ended up being about an anonymity. It ended up being more about emotional maturity. And even the time shifted piece, like there's some very cool technology, experiments or startups that are playing with that. Like Marco Polo is a good example, where you can actually have pretty good interactions just by sharing videos back and forth with each other. So, when the pandemic came, or I'll say in America, when lockdown, that was the moment, like March 2020, we just felt like, oh, this is the moment. Like this is the moment to really launch this. This is what the world needs. Everybody's going to be locked in for who knows how long. And we did get ahead of it, because we're deep sensors. I know, like you are, like we actually intuitively were able to get ahead of for probably a whole week. Because we got an email out saying, hey, calling all space holders, and that, now's our time, and we got to do this. And then a week later, it was this avalanche. I mean, every company, everybody, and most people were having to scramble to re-engineer, right? They're like, oh my God, like how do we adapt? And we were already there. But then a different problem emerged, because the whole world went virtual. And it was like, oh my God, now it's just this huge sea. And so we thought, well, maybe our job is more about curation. And that was somewhat true, but also potentially confused us a little. Like, oh, are we curating everything that's out there, which is just increasing at such a rate that's very hard? Or do we really just focus on our own, space holding, and really nurturing this little piece? So I wanted to go back to one piece of your question, which was, when did I really start to realize, after that dream? I mean, it was several years. I mean, I had another company at the time. It was a digital agency. I actually was involved with another startup in 2010, and it was kind of more like a classified ads kind of thing, but really like trying to amplify small businesses. And this was just always nagging. I mean, it was not nagging, it was knocking. Maybe it was nagging, I don't know. But just, it was always there, just gently kind of knocking, like, no, this is what's important. And like I said, I think it was a compass. That's a really good question. I don't know if I can pinpoint it. I mean, one thing I can say is, in 2015, this would have been 7 years after, or no, my math is off, 8 years after the dream, I, started really studying mindfulness, and going deeper, and finding a stillness. And then I think, and then in 3 years later, in 2018, I went through the Mankind Project. There's like a weekend retreat, and then there's an ongoing circle practice. And this has been going on for almost 40 years. I mean, it's, I think, one of the kind of strongest legacies of men's work, maybe anywhere. And a key component to that work is sitting in circle. And I find that there's kind of an interesting piece here around things like Alcoholics Anonymous, or some of these other support groups that are stigmatized, because it's like, oh, that's just for alcoholics or whatever. But there's also really good work being done there, and the basic idea of sitting in circle. So I think that helped me ground into circle practice. And I also, around that time, had kind of met a lot of restorative justice practitioners, and that's a big passion of mine. So I think it as it tends to do, if I'm walking the path of purpose, like the universe just kept kind of putting all of these people and organizations and practices on my path, related to that practice. And then, it was funny, like, I just always being a technologist, and how can we use technology for democracy? and community. In late 2019, right before the pandemic, I actually did, Mankind Project had already virtualized the circle practice or the integration group. And so I did like a 7-week training specifically on how to take this in-person circle practice and move it online. And I think 170 men had already gone through that training, even in late 2019. So it was very helpful to really get beyond my own ego that I was inventing this, or I was the only one thinking about this, or that I had to do it all, and just kind of soak it in and be like, wow, okay, I just, and I think that's one of the reasons we met, right? Because that's the reason I took the art of convening. So I just can't seem to get enough of it.
And is there anything specific about actually holding a space online that stands out for you as foundational in creating a safe space and in creating connection online?
Yeah, one of the things we think is the most important, and this is true in a lot of different practices, is having shared agreements of some kind. And if it's a group, like a cohort that's been meeting over some time, that maybe those are established. Ideally, they're actually co-created, so it's not just the facilitator showing up and kind of delivering these agreements. Although it can be quite helpful to have a starting point, because it can be equally unproductive to just have a bunch of people staring at a blank screen that have no clue. Like, so there's a piece of building the container, I guess, more broadly is what I would call that concept. So there's just so many elements, like where are we meeting and when, there's a lot of these basic elements, but then I would tag like Priya Parker's Art of Gathering. Like, well, what is the purpose for this gathering? So I think some of those elements are universal, right? Wherever you're meeting, whether it's in person, online, or hybrid. And then online, there are certainly some nuances, and I think agreements around presence, I think, become even more important because it's my own experience. I think I'm often fighting against the tendency to be distracted because I've got this huge computer and 2 monitors and all sorts of stuff. And it's
the second monitor. The second
like,
monitor is an invitation to distraction.
I'll move all my windows over there and I'll turn it off. Like, okay. And we actually created something called the 5 invitations to FeelReal, and I could go through those, but so building a container, and just like having a purpose, like treating it, not everybody likes this word, but treating it as a sacred space. Like, we're really coming here and meeting, having some ritual around it. One of the cool things about the Gathering for Change Agents is that we have a little bit of intro, but then we start each session with a fire lighter. We do a visualization and kind of invite it's either a dead human or a mythological creature or person or figure to actually come and light our fire. And it has this amazing way of just kind of serving as a grounding, which I know is important for you as well, and also just activating our imagination, and then it has something to do with the theme or the topic for that day. And so then I would say that there's the general container, there's agreements, there's just the basics of just, are we clearly communicating? I mean, that's something that I struggled with for a long time, was just how like over communicate. I mean, yes, like send them a reminder email, right, the day before or whatever, because I don't know, maybe a couple people might find that annoying, but a lot of people are going to really appreciate that, because not everybody organizes their life on their calendar like I do, for instance. And so a lot of what we were doing, we used pretty off the shelf stuff for the most part, WordPress and the event calendar, but we customized it because we thought there were some nuances about, like, the fact that it didn't automatically send a calendar invite with the link right in it, right? And we spent a lot of time with those technical nuances, which I know you're deep in the weeds of as well, because they matter, right? If somebody can't get the Zoom link, then they can't come. So that's like an inclusivity measure. Or if it's just a clumsy thing and they're stressed out because they were already running late and they're trying to get to this thing, and all of a sudden they can't find the link, and now they're 5 minutes late. So a lot of it is just bringing everybody in, and then that would lead to the general concept of grounding or centering, which, like I said, could be a more advanced kind of visualization, but it could be as simple as just 3 breaths. And that you've really got to read the room for that, because it just depends, right? If you're, I don't know, it's a group full of like yoga practitioners or teachers, you're going to probably be able to do kind of a longer breathing exercise, for instance. But if it's people, I don't know, an average person, maybe where I was several years ago, like you don't want to actually overdo it. You don't want to bring too many practices, or I've been in groups even recently where it feels like the grounding or the centering practice is kind of going on for 10 minutes. And those of us who are used to that are like deep in our bodies and we're all groovy. And and I open my eyes and there's like 4 people who are just rolling their eyes and they're multitasking. And it's like, what the hell are we doing? So it's a balance, I think, between those nuances. And then, it's interesting to think about the actual agenda and the structure. I tend to be, I don't know, more of a water spirit, I guess, and more about flow and intuition. But I've learned a lot in the last several years about how important it is to really design the pieces of it. Now, you've also got to be willing to let that design basically go out the window and follow the energy of the room. But it helps me a lot to really spend the time. I might generally say almost the equal amount of time you're going to be in the session designing it, maybe more if it's more complex. Because then then I've gotten clarity about the intention and I'm going to be more grounded when I'm there. And like I said, also being willing to let it go, because that rarely ends up being exactly the way we planned it. And then the last thing I'll just mention is just check-ins and check-outs, getting all the voices in the room as early as possible, and then check out at the end. And that could be reduced to 1 word. I mean, there's a huge scale of flexibility. In some groups where we're kind of used to deep space, we'll just have an open check-in. And as one of my mentors says, like, we might spend 90 minutes saying hello. And that's great. And that's beautiful. And that's relational. In other cases, maybe we need to get more into something and we don't have a lot of time. So we're just going to do a 1-word check-in, or maybe even especially if it's a larger group, we're actually going to drop that in the chat. So there are a lot of creative ways we can use all the little pieces of technology, like the chat in Zoom, for example, or like polling technology, which is really what Translator is all about. How do we bring in technology, where we can actually do a poll on our phones, and then all of a sudden we're weaving together all of this information from all the people in the room in a way that might be impossible to do with dialogue, really, especially if it's a larger group, or it might just take forever. And it's anonymous. So in a lot of cases, especially in a business environment, you're not going to get the same information because people just aren't willing to share, or they aren't ready to share, or they don't, for a lot of reasons, trust that they can or should be sharing, and yet they really want to. So anonymizing what's shared can be really valuable as well. Breakout rooms, hugely important. And I think for the most part, it's funny because I think I started learning a lot about convening online. So the reality is, I think a lot of people who've been facilitating for like 30 years, it's like, well, this isn't new. You have a big group of people in person and you break them into little pairs and things. And of course, the big advantage, the main advantage, I think, to being online is we can just press a button and be anywhere in the world, right? I mean, you and I are cross continental right now. So, it's funny. Like, I feel like I was so fond of online and a proponent for that. Not ever saying it was, replacing in person, but just saying, hey, we need to talk more about this. And then a lot of everybody in the last year has been kind of forced to be online. And then a lot of people who were doing in-person stuff before were forced to figure out online. And now I just think we have a bigger toolkit. Now I think we should always basically sit down and say, what is the right tool for the job? Is it in person? Is it online? Is it hybrid? And how are we going to use all the little nuances of this technology? And I think that's why spaceholders, one of the reasons less technical spaceholders really rely on people like us, because we really get how these nuances of technology aren't just annoying. They can actually be like incredibly valuable to bring people together. But there is also a risk factor. If somebody's not familiar with the platform or doesn't get the right link, then all of a sudden, somebody didn't even arrive to the session.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. I'm just paying attention to the time. Do we have time for one more question, or do you have a hard stop?
Yeah, we can keep going for sure.
All right, let's do. So I'm curious about, maybe transitioning to the community question. And, I know a big part of the work that you've been doing has been growing the FeelReal community of space holders. And I'm wondering what that experience has been like. Like, what's worked, what hasn't worked, what have you learned about this process of building a community?
Yeah, it's a great question. I sometimes kind of toggle between the word community and network, uh,
Hmm.
because in some ways we've absolutely, I would say, built a community, in terms of dozens of space holders who have really developed relationships with each other. Um, and then I would use the term network, I think, to describe the sort of 600 plus space holders, let's say, on our email list. And the difference to me is that we're not all interacting. And we haven't really deployed technology such as yours that would really make it easy for people to connect and to find each other. Um, and we were actively looking at Sutra. That's one of the reasons we know each other, and I still am. That's why I'm so interested in what you're building now. Um, and there were a lot of reasons I think we kind of held back on that. But uh, in terms of building the community, what we did very successfully, especially kind of early in the pandemic, was we had something called Sanctuary, and it was every Friday at the same time. And I think that's one of the just logistical things that can work really well. And it can be tricky too, because if you pick a time that's the same time every week, it's great for the people who can make it. But then say somebody has just a regular other meeting, right, then they're never going to be able to make it. So that's one
Hmm.
of the most challenging things I think across all this stuff is how do we schedule things? When do we actually meet people? Um, so it worked though. I mean, it worked very, very well. I know it worked to develop my own relationships with the space holders. Something else I'm a big believer in is decentralized systems, collaborative governance, and we would bring a different space holder in to every session essentially to lead it. And so then there was a piece of this community where it didn't feel like we had to do everything. We as FeelReal, I guess, as an organization, didn't have to necessarily do everything, but we as FeelReal as a community were doing this. And then people also got to see each other's styles and flavors of holding space, which, I mean, that was, I think, the most extraordinary part about it was just there's just so many. I mean, anything from, I don't know, deep healing spaces or grief or trauma work to like doodle shops where we're bringing out the play and the joy and the fun and the creativity. We think it's all important. So that was very exciting. And now a lot of what we've always believed in is how do we actually uplift the spaceholder gig economy, as we like to call it. And I know that's an important piece for you as well. Like how there's a lot of community platforms that really don't have any monetization aspect to them. And as much as I love to we could have a whole other talk about, post-capitalism, post-modernity, sort of utopian, whatever future we want to build. The reality right now is we need to pay the rent, we need to pay the mortgage. And so how do we actually uplift an economic model around space holding, which is related to emotional labor, which is in most cultures right now diminished for one reason or another. And so I think there was this piece of building community that, yeah, it's great to get together. It's great to build relationships. It's great to have a shared purpose. A lot of the sort of tenets I think are important to community. And it's really important to build something together that's meaningful. And since each space holder is essentially like an independent business, what that boils down to is how do we uplift them economically? How do we help them get their message out into the world more effectively? How do we maybe take on some of the things that they don't want to do or aren't very good at, like marketing? And so that, like I said, in the kind of early stages of the pandemic was this marketplace. And now we're having a lot of fun playing with this pilot, particularly this partnership with Translator, because that's creating a really viable economic model. Now, it is a very specific kind of space holding, right? That's diversity, equity, and inclusion within businesses. But that's exciting because we want to just start there, start with one thing, build one channel, one pilot that works really, really well, really stably, and then grow from there, because there's all manner of other kinds of branches and access that people that we could help people access, help space holders gain access to.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate you're kind of creating this bridge between the community aspect and the supporting the economic aspect of being a space holder. And maybe just as our final question, if you had one piece of advice for a space holder today, also in this context of being a micro business, of really being in the business of holding space for people and for meaningful relational connection, what might that advice be?
I love that question. Please don't give up.
The world needs you.
The world needs you. Oh my God. I think you and I share this vision that this is it. We need millions, maybe hundreds of millions of spaces where people can be seen and heard together and have a space to heal and grow and learn and kind of get past or beyond the ego and the conflict. And so, yeah, and it's hard. It's very, very hard work. I think a lot of folks I know are just across the board, but particularly anybody who's been doing this much emotional labor for the last few years, it's very, very challenging. And that's one of the reasons we are kind of reactivating the community in the context of support, so in the emotional support as well as the economic piece, because I feel it, and I think a lot of other people feel it, and we're at a time. It's an extraordinary time in history, just for lots of reasons. But I think there's also, with that, brings this extraordinary opportunity to come together and to face each other, and that's not always easy. And these spaces are essential for that. I'm absolutely convinced of that.
Andy, I just really want to honor you and your work and your incredible heart. Every time I talk to you, I really feel your commitment to, to really creating this world that we all know is possible. So thank you so much for making this time for the conversation and just for sharing your experience and your wisdom.
Thank you so much for having me. It's good to see you, and congratulations on the fundraiser. We'll do everything we can to get that out in the world too.
I really appreciate that. Thank you.